So today I'm going to start with a simple premise. The problems we face in the fashion system are not merely interconnected, they are fundamentally intertwined. And that matters because how we understand a problem shapes how we respond to it. So in this presentation, I just want to open up the question of how we come to know what counts as knowledge, whose perspectives are included, and what might be missed when we reduce complex systems into isolated variables or headlines. And what I do is that I draw on critical realism as a metatheory of trans-disciplinarity as a lens to help us think differently, not just about the fashion system itself, but about how we study and engage with it. And this means taking seriously both the methodological and the ontological, who we are as researchers and what we see, and crucially, what we do not see. So this is not just going to be a talk about fashion, it's about ways of knowing and the kinds of transformation that becomes possible when we acknowledge complexity, history, and positionality. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. I am a Black feminist woman. Yes, you did hear that. I said feminist, and I will explain later what I mean by that. I was born and raised in Sweden, white mom, adopted by a white dad. I am the only person of color in my whole extended family. So this is my husband, my kids, my brother, his family. And there were no other Black kids in the town when I grew up. To be honest, most of my world is still very much white. And this makes me very aware that representation matters. Because while I often do face racism, I have not experienced the deep hardships of garment workers, for example, that they go through in poor regions where clothes are mostly produced. I started making my own clothes. See if this works. Yes. As a very young child. And since then, over the years, I've developed rare skills. I'm one of the few persons in Sweden that can actually spin raw wool into yarn. I can dye yarn. I can do all the steps in weaving a fabric. I am a trained designer. I'm a trained pattern maker. And I'm also a trained couture tailor in the techniques of House of Chanel from the 1940s. I made garments for hundreds of people, for museums, for stage, for artists. And this has given me an embodied understanding, not only of textiles, but of the complex intertwinedness between the material and the social, between the stuff and the culture. And the physicality of clothes and the socio-cultural significance of dress, these are inseparable in my thinking, where I come from. The intertwinedness between the material stuff and the non-material cultural aspects. Why am I telling you all of this personal, private stuff? I do that because my cultural, social, educational experience shapes my perspectives and my assumptions. It shapes how I engage with you, all of my colleagues, my project members. It shapes what I communicate, how I communicate. It shapes what communities I may or may not access. It shapes what knowledge I think is relevant or neglectable. It shapes what data I think is relevant or neglectable, and in what the problem is represented to be, which is another feminist approach that I will explain later. It shapes our objectives and our agendas. I am telling you this so that you know where I'm coming from, because it does shape how I see the world, and it shapes my research. And when I say that I'm a feminist researcher, I don't just mean that I study things from a feminist angle. I mean that my whole approach to research is rooted in the idea that knowledge can and should help to change the world. So feminist research has always had this dual purpose, not just to understand the world, but also to make it more just. As you know, it grew from women's struggle against binary gender division, but it has grown so much broader, looking at power, justice, whose voices gets heard in knowledge production, and that's the version that I align with, one that values diversity, inclusion, and equity in how we create and share our knowledge. So for me, feminism, it's not something that I just switch on when I write up findings. It shapes the whole process, from the questions I ask, how I work with others, to how I present results. It's about really listening to people's lived experiences, but also recognizing the systems of exclusion that we're all operating within. I am especially inspired by Mimi Onoa's work. They created a physical archive that has been of what has been left out as a reminder that in a world where everything is tracked, some things are still systematically ignored. And to be honest, honestly, I think about this every day in my research. I find myself wondering when businesses keep saying they need more data to act, what exactly are they asking for? They don't want to know where, for example, cotton comes from, which is crucial data to understand impacts on water, soil, and communities. And what they say, I'm thinking of the old saying, we measure what we value. And Onoa points out that what is missing is still there and that more data will not fix inequality. In fact, it often makes it worse by reinforcing the same old biases. So coming back to positionality, which is really just about being honest about who we are and what shapes our research. So in my case, it's not just a side note, it's embedded in the entire research process. I study fashion systems, but I'm also someone who gets stressed every day. So I'm part of the system that I'm researching. So who I am, my background, everything shape how I do this research. And in turn, the research process also keeps shaping me. It's an ongoing exchange. So my work connects three different spaces. It's the academic world and the real world of business and the personal lived world. And these interact through three levels: ontology, which is what we assume is real and worth studying; epistemology, how we come to know it; and praxis, the actions we take to change it. And in all of this, reflexivity plays a big role. That means being aware of myself in the moment, reflecting in action. I think about my position, how it affects the knowledge I produce. So I try to be transparent. And that also includes using I in academic writing to show where my voice is part of the process. And then there's the reflection on action. It's a bit small on my screen. Where I go back and revisit assumptions that I've made and ask, what am I privileging? How does this data seem important to me? Why does this data seem important to me? And what problems do I think I'm solving? So together, reflexivity and reflection helps me make my research more transparent by showing how I shape the process and how the process has shaped me. And then finally, engagement. So this is not just that happens after the research is done, it's part of the work, staying connected to the development in the fashion system, talking to other people, collaborating with others throughout to kind of ensure that what I'm doing is relevant for whatever it is I'm trying to change in the real world. So I am going to share just briefly the transdisciplinary setting of one of the research projects that I've been involved in. It was the Sustainable Textiles Project. It's a 3-year science business collaboration between the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University, H&M, which you know is a multinational fast fashion company, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a UK-based charity advocating for circular economy. And it's largely funded by the businesses with whom it collaborates. The idea for this project was to bring together sustainability scientists, a major fashion brand, and circular economy advocates with a shared aim to contribute knowledge for fashion and textile industry that produces minimal waste and operates within the planetary boundaries. So in this context, my research had to engage with 3 distinct system views, each rooted in different worldviews, and 3 corresponding kind of focal aspects. So first, I worked with the perspectives of Earth system science, which draws attention to human-induced systemic change at planetary scale. So in the project, we used the planetary boundaries framework, and that's a framework that outlines the biophysical safe operating space for humanity, and it emphasizes the rising risks of systemic environmental change. And then I also had to engage with business and their view that H&M brought, which frames the fashion system in terms of its value chain. And this value chain, the linear take, make, waste structure, it has basically been the same for centuries. And what the industry is doing now is exploring how to continue growing while reducing the negative impacts without disrupting this particular structure. And then the circular economy advocates, which see the fashion system through the lens of material flows. And their goal is conveniently to close the loop of this linear model by keeping materials in use for as long as possible. And their assumption is that measurable targets and flow-based efficiencies will drive sustainability, essentially solving the problem through quantitative optimization. From the Stockholm Resilience Center, we brought in a social ecological systems perspective grounded in a fundamental insight that people are part of nature, not separate from it. And what this perspective does is it insists on seeing humans as embedded within, not external to ecological processes. With my background, where I come from, both from fashion practice and fashion theory, I kept on pointing to a critical gap in all of these worldviews. It's the missing human in all three of them. In environmental science, in business value creation, and in material flow models, people, consumers, users, wearers, whatever you want to call them, they are often treated as abstract or passive actors. But I think this is a profound oversight because in the end, it's me, you, all of us who are making the choices on when to buy, what to wear, how long to keep, when and how to dispose of our clothes. We all know that. And humans cannot be ignored if we are to move meaningfully towards sustainability. So a short reflection on humans as active actors. So dress, this is nothing new for most of us, but it's a basic fact of life. And my starting point is nudity, because we could all be naked. It's a bit colder here today in England. It's been really, really warm, and we could all have been naked, but we're not, because there's no society on earth where it is socially acceptable to be naked. People always dress their bodies. And dressing their bodies, I mean putting something on their body that might be clothes, tattoos, or even perfume. As Marilyn Monroe said, the only thing she wore to bed was Chanel No. 5. Everything we put on our body, and we do that for social acceptance. So dressing our body is not something that has anything to do, not anything. It doesn't really have anything to do with protecting us from the elements of weather or superficial vanity. So I just want to point out that it is important to remember that fashion does bring many positive things to individuals and to society, because if it didn't, we wouldn't still have it, right? Fashion allows us all to identify with certain groups, to stand in, fit in. It brings excitement, fun. I love it. It brings me joy. And for the first time in history, fashion is not just for the wealthy. Fast fashion has made it possible for more people than ever to participate in this game. And this accessibility, this democratization of fashion is part of what makes it so powerful and frankly so hard to resist. And while many of these fast fashion brands set trends, they don't actually dictate what we wear. What we choose to wear is shaped by a mix of social norms, personal taste, finances, class, gender, cultural values. There's a lot of things. And this is something that we learn from a very, very young age. It's part of our culture, really, really deeply embedded in our culture. And if we think about it, so what I'm wearing here today, it's different from, I promise, what I would wear to a funeral or probably even getting married, or definitely doing at home doing gardening work, being homesick, not presenting to you guys. So, but still, including humans as active actors, it also complicates the sustainability conversation because it points to the fact that we are not just buying clothes, we are consuming fashion as a social practice. It has to do about our culture and a cultural change. So my problem in the previous transdisciplinary project was, how do I make an argument to all of these colleagues and business actors that humans are imperative to include if we want to create real change in the fashion system? So I needed to connect everything we know from social sciences about humans and consumers and how we act and culture to other system views like planetary boundaries, value chains, and material circularity. I had to join these perspectives together and not excluding them, because all of our perspectives and all of our knowledges are important. So to make sense of the complexity and the many worldviews, I use critical realism as a meta-theory because it gives me two crucial keys. It gives me ontological depth and a stratified reality. And what meta-theory does is asking big picture questions like what is reality made of and how do we come to know it? It helps me answer these questions by reminding me that what we can observe, what we measure, and what we record experience is just one layer of reality. In fact, reality is layered, it's stratified, and there are mechanisms, structures, and historical forces that shape what we observe and experience. But what we see and what we experience is just one layer of reality. It is not all that is. So when I say that fashion is an intertwined system, I mean that the social and the ecological, the non-material and the material stuff, they're not just connected at the surface, they are connected all the way through. And this is important because the data that we typically use, like production volumes or carbon emissions, it tells us something, but it doesn't tell us everything. And it definitely doesn't tell us how to change the system. So this theory helps me dig beneath the surface of data and understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening. So I use the word problematic rather than wicked problems, and we can have a discussion about why and how later. But the problematic of fashion means that all of the aspects that are currently dealt with separately within the fashion industry, value network, whatever, are intertwined and simultaneously present or taken for, or they are intertwined and they are present simultaneously and they taking place simultaneously. That's what I wanted to say. So this problematic, it also calls for the attention for the concept of emergence. Because what we experience, the problematic we experience, like climate change or flooding, everything, it has emerged through the intertwinedness of the social and ecological aspects. And the fact that what we experience has emerged means that there is no root cause to the problem. So this example, just yesterday, I saw that Sports Direct are selling jeans on sale, but never mind. A pair of new jeans for less than £3. How is that possible? That price isn't just a reflection of efficiency. It's a product of deeper realities. It stems from global inequality, from colonial legacies, and from systemic exploitation. And that price, in turn, drives volumes of production that lead to emissions that contribute to climate change, drought, floods, and extreme weather. So the fashion system clearly doesn't have one single problem. And we often treat these issues as if they were separate, but they're not, because there's no part of a single interconnected problematic. So we can't point at one part of the system and say, this is the root cause. And we certainly can't fix one part and expect that the whole thing would change because this intertwinedness that goes all the way through. So this is why our understanding of the system needs to be more than just data. We also need to explore what isn't visible or collected, not just what shows up in our spreadsheets. And this is also where positionality matters deeply, because our worldview and our research choices shape what we are looking for, what we ignore, and how we interpret reality. We are not neutral observers, we are in the system, and our work is shaped by that position all the way through. So this is also why I find critical realism adds real power to thinking of fashion as a systems, because it helps us go beneath the surface and understand what we observe, the empirical level, that's only one level of reality. And that underneath that, we see the structures, the histories and forces that shape what we see, but often go unacknowledged. So this example of the new pair of jeans that cost less £3, yes, the price is real, but it is a reflection of these centuries of what the system has looked like and the systemic exploitation and everything. But these deeper mechanisms beneath the price, they don't show up in data. So merely raising, when we say we're going to raise the price of clothes, or just focusing on reducing emissions or focusing on material volumes without addressing these underlying dynamics, won't change the system. So this is what I mean when I say that numbers miss this stratified reality. They miss the generative mechanisms that actually shape the outcomes. So this brings us to another important point, that a system is not a sum of its parts. It is a production of how those parts interact. And in fashion, properties like sustainability and circularity, based on this, they don't reside in individual fibers or garments or even eco-labels. They emerge from how the system as a whole operates, how the materials are sourced, used, managed, discarded. So improving fibers or labeling in isolation will not lead to real change because it ignores a system's perspective. So instead of asking, how do we fix this part or that part, we should be asking, if we were to redesign the fashion system for sustainable circularity, what would that actually look like? Is it a system built around sufficiency and equity and meaningful reuse rather than one marked by, let's say, hard to recycle fiber blends or fragmented infrastructure or confusion where consumers are at home just trying to figure out which bin to put this part in? But to get there, we need more than technical fixes. We need to reimagine the system, not just tweak it. And if we can't imagine a just, sustainable, circular fashion system that works, how can we ever change or transform the current system? Yes, thank you for your attention. So just 3 key insights. First, positionality is not merely a backstory, it's a critical methodological commitment that sets the scene for our research. Secondly, metatheory of trans-disciplinarity. It helps me understand the fashion system. It's a reminder that what may seem like separate challenges are actually deeply intertwined. And thirdly, critical realism. It gives me, or us, ontological depth. It helps me look beneath the surface of empirical data and ask what structures, systems, and histories are generating what I see. Because without this deeper analysis, our solutions risk being superficial or even worse, reinforce the very problems we hope to address. So the one key takeaway that would be that meaningful change in the fashion system will not come from more data alone, but from more courageous reflections on who we are, what we value, and what kind of world we want to build together. I think that's where I say thank you. Yes, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Celinda. That was such an interesting and well articulated presentation. Thank you very much.